Sup you beautiful people. Hope you've had a fantastic day. Welcome back to another new episode of What If Deku Joined the League of Villains. Don't forget to shower some appreciation onto the incredible author responsible for this fanfiction. The link is conveniently waiting for you in the description box down below. If you guys enjoy this what if, comment down below and let me know. And go ahead and check out other what ifs in the channel after watching this video. Before we get into it though, don't forget to subscribe and leave a like, and also share this video with your friends. So let's start this video. 55 years ago, Shiro was dragged somewhere. Of that much he was aware. He had not been blinded yet he could not see either. No, that wasn't right. It would be more accurate to say he did not want to see. His mind was in such a state of shock that he was unable to process anything else. And honestly, who could blame him? After what those monsters did to him, how could he be anything other than shocked? Shiro could still remember every horrific detail. Their scents, their sick voices, how they touched him, and how they went high. He couldn't even describe it properly, and frankly, he didn't want to. The whole experiences hurt. They hurt so much. And even though he wanted to stop thinking about it, he couldn't. The way he smelled afterwards was a cruel reminder that it had happened, that it was real. Shiro was briefly snapped out of his trance by the sound of a door opening. Without warning, the guards threw him into the room. Shiro brought up his elbows to cushion his landing. He glanced up at the guards who, before closing the door, uttered a message. Your roommate will be back later. Dread overcame Shiro as the idea of a roommate who could potentially be as bad, if not worse. Yomiya Kiwatari caused him to shake violently, as his breathing became heavier. So much, that combined with his recent trauma caused him to fall unconscious. Later. Hey, a voice called out. Kid, what are you? Oh, you're my... Shit, I'd better call. The voice sounded concerned, but Shiro couldn't understand why. Don't worry kid. I'll get you help and cleaned up. Then the voice scowled. What the fuck Himitsu? What the fuck? Shiro felt warm arms pick him up, but he lost consciousness again. Later. Shiro felt warm. Not in a bad way, more comforting and cozier. Almost like he was in his bed at home. Slowly, he opened his eyes. From what he could see he was in a double bed covered by a green duvet inside a room with a carpet, brown couch, coffee table, and a TV. There were two archways that led to two separate rooms. What stood out most in the room was the person sitting on the ground cross-legged with his hands raised up resting on his knees. Shiro recalled Nico doing it once. It was something called meditation. The man possessed wavy light green hair that obscured his eyes and a light beard. His attire consisted of a green t-shirt and tracksuit bottoms, but lacked any shoes or socks. Shiro thought the man looked old, well, older than his mother, but not grandpa old. You're awake. That's good to see, the man addressed Shiro. How do you feel? He knew it was a bad question considering what the child has just gone through, but he needed to know. It was the best way to ascertain the boy's mental state. Shiro didn't answer straight away. He stared at the man with suspicion and distrust. Fine. Shiro gritted through his teeth. The man sighed. Well, that's disturbing. Eh? Shiro gasped. That wasn't the response he expected. The man rolled his eyes. Most people who go through what you just did wouldn't be fine. Quite the opposite. The fact that you are shows there's something seriously wrong with you. Shiro's face turned red with anger. How dare this man act as he knew him? I am not fine. I just lost my mom. He screamed, tears beginning well up in his eyes. And that man he. Shiro trailed off at the end. He couldn't even say it. Do I look fine to you? No, the man gave him a sympathetic look. But that's all the more reason to be honest about it. Shiro gave him a confused look. You want to scream, shout, or cry? Do it. I won't judge you. Bottling up your emotions all the time is never a good thing, much less healthy. Sometimes you just need to let it all out. It might have been a bit much to tell a child all of this, but given what he went and would continue to go through, learning how to express his grief and emotions now was critical. Shiro's just stared at him for about a minute before grabbing his pillow and throwing it at his face. The man didn't even so much as faze much to the child's fury. Shiro activated his core to blind him, but the man simply closed his eyes, taking all the assaults in a nonchalant manner. When that didn't work, Shiro got out of the bed, walked over, and began to pound against the man's chest with his little fists, all the while the latter looked on with a somber expression. Shiro panted heavily. His attacks had done nothing more than run him dry of air and annoy the man, even if he didn't look it. Do you feel better now? The man asked after a minute. No, Shiro sniffed. At least you are being honest, the man said. That's what's important. He didn't dare raise his hand to pat Shiro's head. Well, he wasn't sure yet. He did not think Shiro would want any form of comfort from an adult, much less a male, right after he'd been violated. Shiro glared up into his eyes. The boy's cheeks and eyes were red, a few tears there, but he held them back. Who are you? My name is Itsuki, and I am your roommate. Present. Luminous arrow. Detroit smash. Their attacks collided and cancelled each other out. However, All Might's hand was lightly burned as a result. TCH, he scowled. I guess I should have this much from a villain who went toe-to-toe with All for One. Oh, All Might, you're too kind, Shiro replied sarcastically. That old geezer was one of the toughest villains I've ever fought, which kind of makes sense because of the number of quirks he stole since they first emerged. It wasn't enough to kill me though. All Might frowned. All for One was a very secretive individual, yet you seem to know a lot for someone who was his enemy. Shiro merely shrugged. Even enemies can hold mutual respect, Toshinori Yagi. All for One and I may not have gotten along, well, not as bad as other villains, but we respected each other enough to occasionally align and share information. How else do you think I know your name? Well, there went that theory. What else had All for One shared? What else did he tell you? All Might asked concerningly. One for All Might froze as his worst fears were confirmed. I've known about that for decades now. Hold on a minute. All Might shouted. Why would he tell you about that? That would risk. The same reason I turned down his offer for a quirk, Shiro interrupted without missing a beat. I would never take on a power that belonged to someone else to become stronger, regardless of how much it might benefit me. Be it for war, profit, or respect, I will do it through my own power and no one else's. Is that understood? There was also the fact that accepting a quirk from someone like All for One meant you were indebted to them, and if personal experience had taught him anything, which it had, it never ended well. All Might was surprised at Shiro's explanation. Even if he didn't want One for All, why not inform others of its existence? Then again, if villains like Atrocity knew about it, then there would be unspeakable chaos. That hasn't stopped you from using people and their power. All Might argued. Again, not denying what I've done, Shiro shrugged. About All for One though, during the last few months of his life, we were on pretty bad. All Might felt veins standing on his forehead as he mentioned young Midoriya. After everything he put him through, he had the gall to say he's upset about not finding him instead of All for One. Just as he was going to launch another smash, he noticed the way Shiro phrased that sentence. Latest, suicide, attempt. He thought. That can't be right. I know he tried after I spoke with him, but it was never mentioned. There was no way, right? Judging from that look on your face I can tell you're confused. Shiro's interruption brought All Might back to reality. That's latest All Might, not first. I'm gonna go out on a limb and say All for One didn't tell you during your final battle. Tell me what? All Might stammered. All for One had told him a few things about Midoriya's past, none of which were good. Izuku himself admitted that he had not had a good life. However, neither of them had elaborated much further than that. That wasn't the first time he tried to kill himself, Shiro explained. There were plenty of times before that. The leader of Hades was genuinely surprised that All for One had not told All Might. It would have been a good way to throw the hero off his guard, not to mention torment him. Then again, it was possible he hadn't known either. All Might felt his heart stop. For several seconds he stopped breathing as he struggled to process what he had learned. That wasn't the first time. What was then? For that matter, when was it? Not gonna lie, Mr. Symbol, the shit people will put another person through just for being different would shock you, Shiro continued. Guys like me and All for One are depraved, but unlike those people in school, we're honest about it. Given how attached he was to Deku, I'm surprised All for One didn't massacre his entire school or turn them into gnomes even. Shiro would never admit this to anyone, but Izuku's entire life, and by extension Katsuki's, disturbed him. In particular, the party surrounding it. All Might felt a strange sense of nausea. All for One had said something similar during their battle, meaning there was at least some truth to it. But, what? How bad had Midoriya's life been before he met him? 53 years ago. Are you done yet? Shiro grumbled. We've been sitting here for 2 hours. Patience is a virtue, Shiro, Itsuki pointed out. Good things come to those who wait. How is me being bored out of my mind a good thing? Shiro retorted. Well, maybe if you committed properly, you wouldn't be so bored, Itsuki suggested. Maybe if you had better training exercises I would. Shiro snapped back. Seriously, meditation is nothing but taking a nap while sitting up. It was at this point Itsuki opened his eyes and stared down at his young, unwilling companion. Sharpening one's mind is just as important as strengthening their body, he said. Meditation is excellent for the first, and quite relaxing to boot. Really? Because half the time it seems like its only purpose is shoving sticks up our asses, Shiro complained. Itsuki gave him a disappointed look, causing Shiro to feel guilty. Sorry. I see your vulgarity is improving. Too bad the same can't be said for your technique, Itsuki said. I know. I'm trying, Shiro sheepishly defended. It's just, I'm trying okay. Itsuki shook his head. That excuse will only work for so long before it becomes useless. Shiro stared at the ground in shame. It wasn't as if he was being lazy. He just wasn't that good. Itsuki gave him a sympathetic look. Shiro had been trying his hardest, but he was still only 7 years old. There was a lot he didn't understand. Let's get to bed, okay, Itsuki suggested. Aris is on hold due to dealings with other villains, so we have a bit of time off. Until we don't, Shiro miserably pointed out. There was a brief silence between them. It wasn't as if they could change their lifestyle, no matter how much they wanted to. Yami had made sure of that. "Let's get to bed," Itsuki said. "We can continue tomorrow morning." As soon as they had freshened up, two climbed into the double bed and slept till dawn. It was a massive improvement to when they first met. 2 years prior, Shiro, due to his experience with Yami and Kiwatari, was wary of Itsuki and refused to share a bed with him and opted to sleep on the couch instead. Itsuki, however, was against the idea, so let Shiro stay in the bed while he slept on the couch, much to the latter's distrust. For the first few weeks, Shiro refused to talk with him and tried to pretend he wasn't even there. Itsuki, being the patient man he was, decided to stay within Shiro's boundaries as a sign of respect. However, others didn't follow. During the moments he was at work, Yami had someone come and prepare Shiro for his future job. That someone turned out to be none other than Kiwatari, who, much to Itsuki's utter disturbance, took delight in educating Shiro. He had never liked the man much before, but his actions and behavior towards Shiro, who looked absolutely shattered when he came back, made Itsuki despise him. This worsened when Kiwatari started to refer to Shiro as Ikari, as though he was some sort of replacement for the boy's mother. Itsuki was half tempted to kill him then and there, only stopping because Yami, who was an occasional educator, would kill him. Not wanting Shiro to experience it because of his age, Itsuki made a compromise with Yami that assured him Shiro would not have to partake in any sexual activities until he was in his teens. It was a low victory, but the best he could get. Following this, Shiro concluded that Itsuki was not going to molest him, and taking pity on him, in Shiro's words, the boy offered to share the bed with Itsuki, saying it would be warmer for them both. Although it had been an awkward first night, the two eventually fell asleep and snuggled up next to each other as they would for years to come. As a result, Shiro started to open up to Itsuki, who in turn opened up to Shiro, while also mentoring him on various things such as his quirk, reading, writing, fighting, and even cooking. Thus, becoming his sensei. In the short span of 2 years, Shiro had learned a lot from Itsuki, and about him. 23 years prior, Itsuki lived homeless after his parents abandoned him for, in his words, failing to live up to their expectations. With no way to support himself, he resorted to petty thievery to survive. When it wasn't winter, Itsuki would live out in areas with nature such as parks and forests, where he could use his quirk freely. The man's quirk allowed him to control the grass. He could grow it, provided there was fertile soil, strengthen it, sharpen it like a blade, and freely manipulate it in whatever form or manner he desired. When he didn't steal, his quirk provided him with the means to survive. It was also the reason he loathed footwear, because the nature of his quirk made going barefoot preferable. One day, while sleeping in the park, Itsuki was attacked by thugs and brought to Aris, where he was forced into prostitution by Yami's predecessor, and made take part in the cage matches. Although he struggled at first, he eventually started to work his way up the chain, and managed to secure this small living space, where he, thankfully, didn't have to do business. It was not a perfect life, but it was one he had, mostly, accepted. Shiro also learned quite a bit about his master, and the organization he ran. Aris, christened after the Greek goddess of content, strife, discord, and contention, was a villain organization that specialized in human trafficking, drug trade, and illegal quirk fights. Human trafficking was how it got most of their slaves, who were forced into prostitution along with other jobs. Drug trade mostly involved quirk-focused drugs, however, they also sold classic drugs such as heroin and cocaine. The quirk fights brought in the most money because gambling was involved, and it hosted important clients such as politicians, high-class citizens, and important public figures. There were some heroes in attendance too, but mostly as bodyguards. One might find that shocking, but hey. How else could a shady group like them remain hidden? Yami himself was the cold-blooded ruler of this faction, who rose to power after the previous leader passed away. There was no evidence, but rumors had circulated saying Yami killed his predecessor, not that anyone was dumb enough to call him out on it. Ever since then, he governed Aris with an iron fist, controlling its profits, members, and territories. He was a very disturbed man. He encouraged violence, murder, and rape against others, including children, and urged his members to take part, saying they were free to do whatever they wanted to whoever they wanted. It was an ideology that his men, particularly Kiwatari, had sickeningly taken in stride. Most were just as bad, if only slightly less bad, than he was. Shiro did not interact with them much, not that he wanted to, aside from a few training sessions, when one or two of them thought it would be fun to spar. End result. He came out with scrapes and bruises and fortunately no broken bones. Itsuki always pointed out he could have come back even worse, which Shiro agreed since it was clear these lunatics were restraining themselves. Regarding his own training, Itsuki had taken to teaching Shiro the basics in martial arts, before moving on to more intermediate lessons. When it came to quirk training, Itsuki helped Shiro discover more about his own quirk and what it could do. Under his tutelage, Shiro realized he could shoot out the light from his body, and mold it into whatever form he desired. Itsuki theorized that Shiro could do much more in relation to the properties of light, much to the latter's excitement, but it would take time to unlock them. However, Shiro didn't mind. Light form, Shiro announced suddenly. Ha! Itsuki turned over. Light form. Shiro repeated enthusiastically. That's what I'll call my quirk. You know, because it's light and I can form it into what I want. Cool, right? Why not? Itsuki shrugged. I've heard worse names. Present. Turning invisible again, Shiro jumped above All Might and coating his leg in light axe kicked him in the face. However, All Might had braced himself, so he didn't crash to the ground. Taking advantage, he grabbed Shiro's leg mid-air and swung him around. Smash. He brought Shiro down on the ground to his left. Smash. He brought Shiro down on the ground to his right. Smash. He brought Shiro down on the ground directly in front of him. With each throw, Shiro was brought down on his back, and by a small extension, his head. He felt a little woozy, but that was mostly from the spinning, not the impact. He had Rika and Sheeta to thank for that. His villain outfit wasn't just for show and style, Sheeta's fault, but to support his quirk and protect him. The suit in question was quite durable with multiple hard hits and blades with resistance to various elements. It could also be used to channel his quirk into, as all Shiro needed to do was apply a little light, and his suit's defenses were strengthened. While All Might had been smashing him around, he had been armoring his back and had to reduce the damage. Emphasis on reduce. He was still suffering damage, just not as much as he normally would, or rather, not as much as he should. All Might wasn't the 0.1 hero for nothing. Pulling him back into a hold around the waist, All Might performed a German suplex. Smash. The impact left Shiro reeling as he barely managed to protect his head. Blood started to flow from his head and nose. All Might wasn't finished. Rolling backwards, he hoisted Shiro up into the air and ran. Focusing all his power on his right arm, he punched Shiro, who diverted all his power to defense, square in the stomach, which not only caused the man to vomit in pain, but also sent him crashing into the wall and creating another big crater. Shiro hung from up there where All Might could see blood coming from his mouth. Maybe I overdid it a little, he thought worriedly. Even still, I can't afford to hesitate. Too much is at stake. Just then several lights flashed on, much to his confusion. Shiro knew what they were for though. Okay, what are you, a wrestler now? Shiro asked quizzically. All Might rubbed the back of his head. Boy, did that bring back some memories. I had a teacher in the US, and I took part in a few matches, he admitted sheepishly. Scripted, I take it? Shiro guessed. All Might chuckled. Not exactly. The matches were full on legit, no faking at all. Then he realized what he was doing. Wait, why am I telling you this? For that matter, how are you still conscious? Shiro rolled his eyes. I asked, you responded. Also, asked Might, I'm 60 years old. I've been in thousands of fights that involve me taking hard hits and building up endurance. My point being, this is nothing new for me. 60? All Might repeated. Young Midoriya said you were in your 50s. I was 59 when Deku met me, Shiro explained. He didn't know my actual age. Although I suppose, to be fair, I never told him, and he had a bunch of other traumatic shit to deal with it. All Might shot him a look. Not all of which were caused by me. But still done by you, All Might chastised. Let's not forget the whole kidnapping and trying to kill him. Okay, I confess to both counts, Shiro admitted before looking away. Although, I really do need to apologize for the second, especially since he was apparently telling the truth about Graphene trying to kill him and the kids. What? You mean you didn't investigate beforehand? All Might roared. In my defense, Graphene never went against my orders before, not even once, Shiro responded weakly. That's hardly an excuse. All Might yelled. Yeah, little deathmatch scarred him for life. Oh, Deku was traumatized long before he came here, Shiro said. Although, the near-death experiences, losing his freedom, and shit he saw at Tenem, probably didn't help matters. All Might stared at him for what felt like an eternity. He then face-palmed himself. For someone who's supposed to be a successful crime boss, you sure are an idiot, All Might deadpanned. I am not. Shiro snapped. I have moments, but so does everyone else. Hell, even All for One could be a dumbass when it suited him. All Might could not imagine that no matter how hard he tried. You know what, Ass Might? Screw you. You hardly want to be talking about idiotics with that stupid entrance you do, Shiro raged. Not to mention. Okay, we're done here, All Might declared as he jumped forward. Soaring through the sky, the hero intended to smash Shiro through the wall and knock him out for the rest of this ordeal. Unfortunately, Shiro had other plans. Part of the reason the lights were active was to support him. Shiro could only manipulate his light, and not from another source, however, he could still absorb it to either power or heal himself. Hence the reason for chatting up All Might just now. His wounds were slightly healed, but he focused most of his efforts on boosting his power. Bringing his hands together, Shiro concentrated the light into a single ball that looked like weaved threads. Then, pivoting off the wall, he threw it straight at All Might. All Might attempted to bat it away, but the ball exploded into a giant net that wrapped easily around him and tightened instantly. Luminous web. All Might struggled and squirmed to break free, only to fail. Every time he tried to fight, the web fought back and tightened even further. Damn it. How strong is this? He thought. Ha! Shiro sneered. Good luck getting out of that. Even atrocity wasn't stupid enough to get caught in it. Shiro dived toward his prey. It would be foolish to waste this chance, especially when All Might couldn't defend. A trapped hero was a dead hero. Rapid fire light orb. Light spears. Both attacks exploded across All Might, hitting him everywhere, including his weak spot. All Might gritted his teeth and held back his scream. He then noticed Shiro flying just over him with his entire body spread out. As during his battle with Katsuki, light emanated from Shiro that covered the sky of the room. As the light intensified, All Might was forced to close his eyes. "This is payback for earlier," Shiro shouted. "Heaven's judgment." At that moment, light rained down and consumed All Might completely. The latter of which could nothing but scream in pain, not that anybody could hear him. 48 years ago. Itsuki flipped Shiro onto his back, causing the latter to release a cry of pain. Itsuki then rested his knee on Shiro's neck. "You're dead," he announced. "Ugh. Son of a bitch," Shiro cursed. "I thought the doctor said you were going blind." Itsuki frowned. "He did. I can still see enough to kick your ass." Shiro growled at his mentor but didn't argue. He was the one who asked for this after all. Since he only had a year left before Itsuki's deal with Yumi ended, Shiro requested that they intensify the training, so that he was strong enough when the time eventually came for it. Shiro knew exactly what he was meant to be doing. When he wasn't participating in fights, he would be, as Yumi put it, whoring himself out to various customers that came by, including Kiwatari. The mere thought of being touched by that man made him want to vomit, but at the same time, he knew there was no fighting it. He had seen what happened to people when they didn't work like they were supposed to. Still, seeing humans, including children younger than him, subjected to that was a nightmare in and of itself. Shiro couldn't believe his mother had done this for a living, although Itsuki clearly stated that Madame Kaba's brothel was much nicer than this place. Shiro couldn't help but agree. In particular, Kiwatari scared him in some ways more than Yumi. The man had literally taken to calling him Hikari, and tried to get near him every chance he got. One time he managed to break into Itsuki's apartment while Shiro was alone. Out of terror, he managed to accidentally turn invisible and hide. When the sicko realized his prey was not there, he left, but Shiro refused to come out of hiding, or rather he didn't know how to become visible again, until Itsuki came back. Following this, Itsuki made sure to add a special lock to keep Kiwatari out. All that aside, Shiro was grateful for Itsuki's presence in his life. He reminded him of his mother in some ways, who he continued to mourn. Shiro missed her deeply, but it accepted she was gone from his life, and would never be a part of it again. However, living with Itsuki made him wonder if this was what having a father was like, since he knew nothing about his. "Hey, sensei," Shiro called. "Do you think I'll ever be as good as you are someday?" "That?" Itsuki asked. "You know what?" Shiro snapped, causing the older man to chuckle. "I know. To be honest, I don't know," he said. "It depends on you really. You could be as strong as me someday, then again you could not. You could be stronger even. Who knows?" Shiro looked down at the ground. Ever since he first arrived at Aris, his future had always been uncertain. And next year when he would start working, it would be even more so. "I don't know what the future holds. Could be you slamming my ass onto the ground." Shiro let out a small laugh. "Who knows? All I know is the here and now. And right now, I know you need more practice." Shiro sighed as he stood up and got back into his stance. Maybe this time he could show Itsuki up. 47 years ago. The day Shiro had been dreading for years had finally arrived. The day when he was supposed to start working. Early that morning, a couple of guards came by on Yumi's orders to bring him to one of the rooms where customers would visit. It was a small room with a bed and sink, but that was all. Then again, why would they need anything else? The room was for having sex, not conducting science experiments. Warning. The following scene is very dark, uncomfortable, and may trigger some people. You may skip it if you like, since you can guess what happens. But you have been warned. Not 2 minutes after he had arrived, a familiar unpleasant face entered the room, causing Shiro to glare. "Hikari." Kiwatari moaned, drool coming out of his mouth. "It's been too long." His face was blushing red. He wore an expression that contained a mixture of joy and lust. It made Shiro want to vomit. "It's Shiro, you dumbass," he harshly corrected. "My mom is dead, remember? And whose fault is that, I wonder?" Kiwatari rolled his eyes. It wasn't like he killed her. If Hikari and Shiro had just let him do what he wanted 8 years ago, nothing bad would have happened. "As if I need to answer," Shiro spat. He knew it was pointless to explain it to this asshole. "What do you want, fuckbag?" Kiwatari shot him an annoyed look. "Isn't it obvious?" he asked. "I'm a customer." "Meaning?" "Fuck off, you demented shit-faced pervert," Shiro snapped. "After everything you put me through, you are the last person in this godforsaken shithole that I would ever even consider." Before he could finish, Shiro felt his entire body freeze. Even though it had been years, Shiro recognized the sensation of Kiwatari's paralysis. What he found confusing was that the man did not even touch him. Wasn't that how his quirk worked? "I see that Nature Freak didn't do anything to correct your mouth. No matter, let's get to work," Kiwatari said. Oh, you're probably wondering why I can use my quirk without touching you. Well, like you, I've gone through some training of my own in the last few years. It makes me more useful to Yami, you see. That made a lot of sense to Shiro since he never understood why Kiwatari was kept around. Wasting no time, Kiwatari strode across the room. Upon reaching Shiro, he pinned the teen down and climbed on top. He then gave a lustful smile to the youth as his face blushed. Hikari, Kiwatari breathed on Shiro. The sheer anticipation in his voice combined with his breath which reeked of alcohol, sent shivers down Shiro's spine. Ever since that day you rejected me, I haven't been able to stop thinking about you. I was so stressed and came to you to relieve it through pleasure. I thought I could depend on you, but you rejected me. That really hurt, you know. He brought his face down and kissed Shiro's cheek, much to the boy's disgust which only intensified when Kiwatari started licking down his face and neck. And now, you're not acting like yourself, not moving as you should. He brought his right hand up Shiro's t-shirt to feel his muscles, before moving downwards to touch the rest of his body. Shiro felt sick. There was something seriously wrong with this man. Had he always been this vile, or was he just imagining it? He tried to activate his quirk to no avail. Don't worry. I'll help you remember. He flipped Shiro on his stomach and started to feel him up. We can do it together. Just like old times. Staring with this, he grabbed Shiro's ass squeezed tightly. Shiro wanted to scream, but he couldn't. He couldn't even cry. Now then my lovely, let's get started. Following that, Shiro made a very dark promise to himself. One day, maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but one day, he would kill Kiwatari himself and pay him back for everything he had done to him and his mother. One day. And he swore he would take every sadistic pleasure, no matter how cruel, in how he did it. 45 years ago. Thanks for today, the customer said, dropping the money on the table. No problem, Shiro replied. That was the last one for the day, meaning he could head home where Itsuki would be waiting. I'm home, Shiro announced. Welcome back, Itsuki greeted while meditating. How was your day? How do you think? Shiro shot back. Shiro didn't know why Itsuki asked these questions when he knew the answer. Maybe it was for some sense of normalcy in this hellhole. Or maybe it was to find out how terrible his day was. Whatever the case, Shiro was more distracted with his sensei's bandages. Over the last 3 years, Itsuki's eyesight had gotten even worse. His once green eyes had become clouded by a dark green hue. To compensate for this, Itsuki started using his quirk to see, or rather, alert him to his surroundings. He also started relying on his other sense as well, but it was mostly the former. Yami still sent him out to do his jobs, not much of a surprise really. That man would force an elderly person to work for him if it meant he could get a little extra coin. It irritated Shiro to no end, but there was nothing he could do about it. One thing that bothered him was the way Yami used everyone. Shiro had met people in Aris with specific quirks and talents, but Yami never bothered deploying them to an area where they would be useful. Mind if I join you? Shiro asked. Wanting to meditate with me? Who are you and what have you done with Shiro? Itsuki said with mock surprise. Shut up. Shiro snapped. I just thought it'd be nice for a change. If you don't want me to, I can. Shiro, Itsuki said softly. I was joking. You should know by now I have a sense of humor. And a jackass attitude, Shiro added. Takes one to know one, Itsuki said, eliciting a laugh from both of them. He patted the mattress next to him. Come on. And so, they meditated together in silence. Shiro had never said it, but he found the practice surprisingly relaxing and a great stress reliever. Part of him wished they could stay like this forever. But another part of him knew it could never happen. Little did he know, things were to get much worse. Present. Breathing heavily, All Might staggered to stand up. That last attack hurt. Not like the blows he had sustained previously, it full-on hurt in ways only All for One had managed. During the move, he felt as though his body was on fire. And now he was sore all over. Son of a bitch. You're still standing. Shiro exclaimed. He had been expecting All Might to pass out from that, but here he was proving him wrong. Most people would be finished from that, but not you, Mr. Symbol of Peace. You took it all on in stride. Gotta hand it to you, All Might. I'm impressed. I mean, I knew you were strong, but I never knew you were this strong. Well done. All Might felt a little odd at the praise. It wasn't like All for One where everything was constant mockery and psychological warfare. It was genuine, like a child being praised for doing something by their parents or something along those lines. Thanks, he said uncertainly. So are you. He didn't know why he was saying this. Maybe just to return the courtesy, despite being a villain and all. Sure. Would you fucking get on with it? Rika's voice screeched in his ear. You still can't take much more than this, and neither can you. She wasn't wrong. Heaven's judgment usually took quite a bit out of him. Hence, why Shiro reserved it for finishing off an opponent. He couldn't remember continuing to fight an opponent after using it. Your concern is much appreciated, Rika, but unnecessary, Shiro replied nonchalantly. It's necessary and you know it, she snapped back. Shiro rolled his eyes. Contrary to how she acted in public, Rika was one of the few who could talk shit to him and get away with it. Granted, she had done a lot to earn the right. By the way, the vultures have arrived. What do you want to do? Shiro smirked. Change the setting. No point prolonging the inevitable. The line went silent for a minute. You do realize that if you do this, there's no going back, ever, Rika explained slowly. Everyone will know about you in Hades. Are you ready for that? Not really, Shiro admitted with a small smile. And it was the truth. He was finally stepping out of the shadows for everyone to see. It was both an exhilarating and frightening experience. However, going back was never an option for me. Not as a child, not as a teenager, and certainly not now. The only thing I can do is to keep moving forward. If that comes with consequences, then I'll gladly accept them. He then took a deep breath. Change the setting, Rika. If worse comes to pass, I still have that. There was no answer on the other end. All Might stared at the scene with confusion. The reason he had let Shiro chat away with his subordinate was so he could recover. Their drawn-out fight, coupled with his battle with Nico, was starting to take a toll on his body. Before he could question Shiro, the entire floor they were standing on started to shine brightly. All Might covered his eyes while Shiro smiled. Outside, the helicopters flew all around Kanazawa looking for any sort of action. As soon as they had gotten word that a raid by the heroes and police was in effect, they swung into action. This combined with the recent kidnappings was the biggest event since the Nightmare of Camino. However, they had yet to see any action making them wonder if they had been tipped off wrong. Rumble. 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 The reporters and the citizens were alerted to the shaking of the earth. At first, they thought it was just an earthquake. However, the reporters noticed something was happening on top of Mount Yutatsu. The very summit was opening up with a bright light coming out. When the light cleared, the reporters noticed two figures standing there. One they recognized, and one they didn't. Almost instantly, they started rolling the cameras. Soon after, every person in the nation was glued to their screens. With Shiro and All Might. All Might looked around in awe. From where he was standing, he could see the city of Kanazawa. Looking down, he noticed they were literally standing on a floor made of light with several pillars erected upward. The city of Hades was directly below them. "Hey Chow?" All Might stuttered. "I'm not really sure myself," Shiro shrugged. "The technology involved is too complicated for me to understand. To be perfectly honest, All Might, this is the first time I've ever used it. The people who developed it refer to it as Light Stage. Not the best name I know, but with its capabilities, it can be overlooked." His scientists had really outdone themselves, especially Rika. Out of all his finds, she was by far one of his best. "By the way, because everyone is watching, I'll put on a show that they'll never forget," Shiro said. Suddenly, his entire body began to shine as light swirled around him. Closing his eyes, Shiro breathed in and out slowly as he did during meditation and concentrated. The light that circulated around his body began to morph into a distinct form. A suit of white armor. On his arms were gauntlets with spikes on the side. On his legs were greaves but no sabatons. The most distinctive part was the helmet with 3 spikes coming out from the top with his visible through the visor. The rest of the armor appeared normal, but some parts were smaller than they should be, making it appear tighter. The most striking feature of the armor, in general, was the way light radiated off everything, fluctuating between different color patterns. And I imagined it as something similar to Grand Chariot from Akame Georgia Killer Soren's armor. "Light form. Aurora armor," Shiro said softly. "Now then, where were we?" 44 years ago. Shiro slowly sat up. His head was very sore. He felt like he could pass out again at any given second. "Ah," a familiar voice chimed. "You're awake. Good. You master," Shiro croaked. "What?" Slap. Shiro's head whipped back from the sudden strike from Yumi. Before he could fall back, the crime lord grabbed him by the mouth and glared. "All these years and you still can't understand your place," he threw Shiro to the ground. "What am I going to do with you?" Shiro glanced at him confused. What had he done wrong? He thought back on what he had been doing before. He had been in a match, not a death one, which he barely won. There had been some outside interference hindering him, but Shiro managed to fight it off. After he left, he was here. And he didn't know why. "Aren't you going to punish him?" Another familiar voice asked. Shiro looked around and noticed they weren't alone. Men who worked closely with Yami, including Kiwatari, much to his fury, were all present. In short, men who were just like him. "Yeah, what are you waiting for?" Kiwatari asked enthusiastically. "Patience, boys," another member said smoothly. "You'll get your turn." Punish him? Their turn? What were they talking about? Punishment for what? Shiro asked, confused. Several men smirked deviously at him. "I'm so happy you asked," Yami said smugly. "Punishment for your crime of assault on various members." Shiro stared at him incredulously. When had he ever? "Wait, are you talking about during my last fight?" Yami nodded in confirmation. "But they were interfering, trying to make sure I lost. Was I supposed to just let them?" "Absolutely," Yami assured, much to Shiro's disbelief. "Cheating isn't unheard of in my fights. Frankly, I encourage that sort of behavior since it makes things much more interesting." Cheating is common in everyday life, be it in school, a job, or a competition. The fights are no different. Shiro couldn't believe his ears. What I don't encourage is slaves fighting back against their masters. You broke the rules, Shiro. And now you'll pay for it. Shiro was furious at how unfair the situation was. He did nothing wrong. Why was he being punished for it? Why? Shiro was cut off by Kawatari's quirk before he could finish. Warning 2. The following scenes are very dark, uncomfortable, and may trigger some people. You may skip it if you like, since you can guess what happens. But you have been warned. Once the paralysis had taken effect, Yami swiftly kicked Shiro across the face, sending him sprawling onto the ground. Boys, you know what to do. Yami used his quirk to undress Shiro. Finally, Kawatari exclaimed. You going first, boss? When asked. Of course, Yami said. And remember, be rough. But not enough to kill him. I want him to learn his lesson, so he won't do it again. Aw, what the hell. I may end up doing it anyway. Just a bit of fun, don't you think? There were murmurs of agreement amongst the men as they started to strip down until they were completely naked. Slowly, they surrounded Shiro, and one held him up by the arms. Slap. Yami struck Shiro across the face much harder than before, leaving a large red mark across his face. Do you remember this, Shiro? Do you know what this means? This is what happens when you go against me, Yami ranted. When we're finished here today, I want you to remember this moment. I want you to remember that I can do it to you whenever I want, and there's not a thing you can do to stop me. Why? Because I own you. And that's a fact. Inside, Shiro was crying. Suddenly, he wasn't a teenager, he was a 5-year-old crying out for his mother, only now it included Itsuki. It was worse than when he arrived, because this time, he knew exactly what was going to happen to him. These men, their disgusting scents and wounds, they would be with him forever. Now, let's begin, Yami breathed on his face. Later, Shiro trudged slowly back to the apartment. As he did, his entire ached. Blood trickled down his forehead, complemented by blood from his lips after being punched several times. His body was covered in scars and bruises. And at his back, he suffered a case of rectal bleeding. In short, he had the appearance of someone who had just been through hell, which he had. Worst of all was the smell. Shiro still had their scents on him after he needed to get home and wash. Otherwise, he would be sick. His clothes had been taken, forcing him to trudge back completely naked, while various onlookers stared at him with horrified expressions. Shiro paid them no attention. He was too shocked to even care. After their turns, beating him and Yami told him to go home and freshen up. Otherwise, he wouldn't attract any customers. Shiro didn't care. He couldn't bring himself to care. Not after that. He hated them, all of them. He hated Kawatari for killing his mother and ruining his life. He hated Yami for making his entire existence a complete and utter hell. He wished they were dead. But most of all, he wished he was dead. This life, this misery, this hell, if that was all he could live, then it wasn't worth being alive. He wasn't worth being alive. Later, he finally managed to make it home. As he reached up to knock, Shiro was conscious enough to see it was already open. Shiro stared at the door with immense confusion. Why was it left wide open? Did Itsuki forget to lock it? No, that couldn't have been right. Itsuki would never leave it like this. Dread slowly crept over Shiro as he pushed the door open and stepped inside. Blood. Shiro could see blood all over the wrecked apartment. Wait. It was wrecked. Why was it wrecked? Who would? Shiro's attention was drawn to the center of the room, or more specifically, who was there. Sensei. Shiro barely managed to choke out. Itsuki. Dad. Lying at the center of the room in a pool of blood was his teacher, friend, and father figure Itsuki with multiple stab wounds. Shiro was not entirely sure of how long he had been standing there, but knew it was long enough for someone to come in at the sound of his screaming. Screaming. He had been screaming. How long had he been screaming? He couldn't even hear his voice. Nor could he feel the immense pain of the volume he was putting himself through. But he screamed. And screamed. And screamed. Present. In his armored state, Shiro dashed towards All Might and unleashed an onslaught of punches and kicks that started to slowly push him back. All Might tried to defend, but Shiro wasn't giving him an inch. While it was apparent All Might outclassed Shiro in terms of physical strength, Shiro outclassed All Might in terms of fighting prowess. The man had spent a lot more time with his life on the line and studied more fighting styles. Leaping up, Shiro got his knees around All Might's neck and flipped forward. The number 1 hero was brought down on his head, and when he tried to get back up, he was blasted away by a beam of light. All Might charged forward and unleashed a Detroit Smash, but Shiro grabbed his arm, and using his momentum against him, threw All Might flat on his back, sending out a small shockwave. In retaliation, All Might grabbed hold of Shiro's already clinging arm, and started spinning before releasing the older man. Oklahoma Smash. Shiro was sent to the far end of the summit past the pillars, or he would have if hadn't crashed against an invisible wall. All Might looked on in surprise as the invisible wall began to shimmer, as did the pillars surrounding them. A force field, he muttered. Why? Shiro stood up looking as though being thrown against a wall did nothing. How many bad guys have you sent flying exactly? He asked. The force field prevents stuff like that from happening along with outside interference. It also boosted Shiro's abilities by lessening the strain of his quirk and complexity involved in his attacks, but All Might didn't need to know that. Typically, he only reserved the light stage for serious threats that came to his home, like now. Point taken, All Might admitted before gearing up for another attack. Moving at the speed of light, Shiro was behind All Might in an instant. He brought his gauntlets up and down hard on the hero's back, who double elbowed him in response. All Might did a right back fist only for Shiro to move back slightly and dodge. He launched a kick, however, All Might surprised him by spinning and launching a kick of his own. Their legs collided mid-air, creating a gale force wind. The end result was All Might's kick breaking through and Shiro being sent spinning through the air. Not wanting to waste this chance, All Might rushed ahead and delivered a familiar double uppercut. Alabama smash. Shiro choked on his own blood as soared up into the sky close to where the helicopters were. They couldn't enter, but they were still close. All Might put all his power into his legs and jumped, getting just ahead of Shiro. Shit. He's fast, Shiro thought. Using one for all to propel himself off the force field, All Might aimed straight down for Shiro. Putting both his arms forward, he collided directly with Shiro. Empire State Smash. The pair shot straight downwards until they met the ground. Boom. The impact resulted in a miniature earthquake that could be felt throughout the city. Items fell from shelves in homes and shops. Several citizens tripped from the shockwave. The news reporters in the air were struggling to come up with words for what happened. Meanwhile, with the combatants, All Might shakily stood up. It had been a while since he had done that move. Most of his opponents nowadays were on the ground and beaten in one punch. He shot a quick glance to his enemy who, much to his surprise, was getting up. Shiro's helmet had disappeared, exposing his bloodied head. Blood went down the side of his forehead, however. Most blood was spewing out of his mouth as he struggled to stand. His right ear was bleeding as well. All in all, Shiro looked like a complete mess. How are you still moving after that? All Might asked without thinking. Scratch that. How are you still conscious? Shiro coughed several times, with each one bringing up more blood. Believe me, I'm surprised myself, he croaked as he finally stood up straight. If we were fighting anywhere else, I might be. But right now, I can survive anything you throw at me. Why? Shiro tilted his head in confusion. Why can't you just give up? Surely you can see you have no hope of winning. That only served to make Shiro laugh. I could ask you the same thing, he retorted, grinning. Why fight for a bunch of strangers? You've got students here, sure, but everyone else, you've got no connection to them whatsoever. It's a hero's job to save people, All Might answered honestly. I doubt you would understand. Though, I understand it just fine, Shiro replied. But what about those who don't want to be saved? All Might frowned in confusion. Hades has many members, All Might, many slaves, who were cast out by society and deemed a lost cause. Those forsaken because of their appearance or, and I quote, villainous quirkless who were judged worthless before being given a chance, those who were disgraced, petty criminals who can no longer return due to their actions, and the children of villains who are persecuted for their parents' sins. Many who were thrown away and forgotten have long given up on being saved. They've accepted they won't be saved, that they don't deserve it, and so they don't want to. Catch my drift. All Might didn't say anything. As a hero, he knew he couldn't save everyone, he was only human after all. But how could anyone think they didn't deserve to be saved? How could they not want it? I didn't need saving, I didn't even want it. I was happy where I was. It doesn't matter what you think now. What you're trying to say, I needed to hear that before I tried to kill myself. Izuku's words rang in his ears. He truly believed himself beyond that point, so it was possible for others to be the same. Why though? Why did it have to be that way? Despite what you and those people may believe, everyone deserves saving, Shiro, he said softly. No matter who they are. The silence etched on for a couple of seconds, then Shiro let out a small chuckle. Laughing hard would cause him to choke on his own blood. You're unbearably naive, you know that. You have got to be one of the few people I know who believes that. Even still, with that attitude, I can see why Shimura chose you, Shiro said. All Might's eyes widened. You knew my master. We met a long time ago, Shiro explained. And we sort of teamed up. All Might stared at him in disbelief. There was no way Nana would ever work with a criminal like him. Long story short, we had a common enemy and a common goal. Working together was more convenient than fighting. Afterwards, we parted ways, Shiro finished. I'll admit, she was quite something. It's a shame all for one killed her. Nana Shimura had to have been one of the few heroes and people he genuinely liked back then. Her personality, not to mention her fighting style, made Shiro wish there were more like her. All Might couldn't detect any malice or deception in his voice, only respect. Enough about the past, Shiro announced. I'd say it's time we wrap this one up, don't you, All Might? All Might's gaze hardened. Shiro was right. Why were they even talking, to begin with? He had a mission and a target. And that's all that mattered. However, realizing a normal smash wouldn't put Shiro out of commission, All Might knew he needed to go with that one. Gathering all his strength and power in his right arm, All Might charged forward. Shiro let out a smile and held his arms out, leaving him wide open. All Might wasn't sure if Shiro was doing this as a form of surrender or admission of defeat, but either way, the attack had to succeed. For everyone who was held hostage here, and those that had died, this punch would free them. United States of Smash. 44 years ago. Hey, have you guys found him yet? The man asked on the phone. Mr. Himitsu is starting to get pissed. It's only a matter of time before he starts taking it out on us. There was a quick response that only made him more agitated. What do you mean none of the others are responding? Where are they? Another response made him angrier. Well, find them and tell them to get their asses in gear and find him. Otherwise, Mr. Himitsu will have our heads. As he hung up, the man sighed. Could this day get any worse? He wondered. Slash. The man felt something go by his neck but couldn't see anything. He did feel something down his throat and, wait a minute, that was blood. Why was there blood? Then he realized he wasn't breathing. No, that wasn't accurate. He couldn't breathe. He started to panic because he didn't understand what was happening, why it was happening. There was a kick to his groin that brought him to his knees. Then he felt something sharp pierce his neck and he was dead. Have your heads, huh? Shiro mused. Sorry, but Yami will have to get in line. Shiro gazed at his work with an emotionless expression. This was his 5th kill and the 4th of Yami's men. Earlier he snuck in here with his invisibility and waited for his target. After listening to him ramble, he slit his throat and later put a sword of light through his neck, killing him instantly. Only a couple more to go, he said as he turned to leave. Following Itsuki's murder, a small investigation had been conducted only to end up with a dead end. Yami didn't seem to care much, then again, why would he? To add insult to injury, he forced Shiro to come into work the following day, saying one dead person shouldn't deter things. He did offer to supply some cleaning materials to get the bloodstains out. Shiro could honestly say that he had never wanted to hit him as much as he did at that moment, as he had his entire life. He wanted to do much more than that actually, but had enough sense not to act on it. Earlier today, he played host to a vile customer, a regular, who shouted all sorts of profanity. Normally, Shiro would put up with it. However, the customer started spewing crap about Itsuki, causing Shiro to use his quirk and kill him. The commotion alerted a guard, leading Shiro to believe this was the end. He didn't care. With Itsuki dead, there was no reason to continue on with his life. Or so he thought. The guard who entered was one Shiro recognized, as he had helped Itsuki with a few tasks from time to time. Instead of taking him to Yami, he took Shiro back to his apartment and handed him a letter from Itsuki. The contents of it were, let's just say they convinced Shiro to change his mind and push him towards his current task. Following this, the guard provided him with information on his targets and where they lived. And one by one Shiro killed them off. He was saving Yami and Kawatari, who went outside for some reason, for last. Shiro's murder of the client sparked a wide manhunt for him. However, Shiro managed to remain hidden thanks to his invisibility. It was one of the skills Itsuki had encouraged him to hide, especially after he perfected it. Now he could move about without being blinded. One. He found them. And he killed them. It had been so easy, Shiro nearly laughed. Yami's men may have been strong, but they were so confident in the safety of their base that they never considered the possibility of someone, least of all another slave, moving through their base and eliminating them. It just went to show how complacent they had gotten. Although in their defense, Aris had never been raided before, and Shiro was using the element of surprise. As Shiro finished off the last one, he took a moment to eat and rest. He doubted Yami would go down so easy. He needed to save his strength. Later, Yami was furious. Not the typical things weren't going his way, which they weren't, furious, but the over-the-top rage he would kill the first person he saw, and possibly everyone, furious. For starters, Itsuki was dead. He didn't know how and why, not that he really cared, but that meant he had lost one source of income, entertainment. Next, Shiro had gone MIA after killing a valuable customer. He got that the teenager was sort of upset over Itsuki, but it was just one roommate, he'd get a new one, provided he was allowed to continue living there. Yesterday clearly wasn't enough of a lesson for him. That would soon be rectified though. Third, none of his men had been able to find Shiro after he disappeared. It was one teenager in an area with few hiding places they should have been well familiar with. How hard could it be? And to top it all off, they had the audacity to refuse his calls for information. It seemed Shiro would not be the only one undergoing punishment today. Yami was so distracted by his thoughts that he hadn't heard the door to his office open. However, he did hear it close. Finally, he exclaimed, "Tell me you idiots have found him." When he received no response, he became irritated and turned around. "Answer me, you piece of..." He saw no one there. What the fuck? He got out of his chair to inspect. He couldn't hear or see anyone. Had he imagined it? No, he definitely heard the door closing. Maybe one of his idiots came in thinking he was out to leave a report and closed it shut when they realized he was there. He wouldn't put it past them. Taking a peek outside, Yami noticed the hall was empty. Even stranger was the silence. He couldn't hear anyone running away. I'm just stressed, he decided as turned back in. One fuck up after another and it's driving me insane. Guess that's another thing I need to punish Shiro for. Then in an instant, Yami saw a glimmer of something close to him and stepped back while simultaneously sending his quirk out. There was a loud crash at the end of the wall as something invisible struggled against his darkness. Touching his neck, it took Yami a moment to realize he had avoided having his throat slit. Glaring at the invisible enemy, he increased the power, causing the entire wall to be consumed by shadows. Alright. I don't know who the fuck you think you are, but you just made the biggest mistake of your life, Yami growled. Then he noticed light shining from within his dark prison, glowing more intensely by the second. What in the? A beam of light pierced through the shadows and headed straight for him. Yami barely put up a shield around his body before the light hit him and blasted him through the wall into the hallways. Arg! Yami cried out as he landed outside. The wall to his office had been destroyed, leaving only debris behind. The darkness he had been controlling disappeared also. Before he could summon it again, Yami was met with a hard knee to the skull that sent him falling backwards. In retaliation, he unleashed several shadow knives only for them to meet the air. Yami was then struck by something hard across his back which sent him rolling forward. Before he could get back up, two sharp objects pierced the back of his shoulders, causing him to cry out in pain. In an act of desperation, a large quantity of darkness swarmed around him like a hurricane, and then released it everywhere and hit everything in his path. There was a crash against the wall accompanied by a grunt. And for the first time, Yami glimpsed his assailant slumped down on the ground. Shiro, he exclaimed shocked. But, how? He was confused as to how Shiro was invisible, since he hadn't been able to do that before. However, that confusion quickly turned to anger. What the fuck do you think you're doing? He snarled. Killing you. Shiro jetpanned with an angry glare. Was it not obvious, you one-eyed scumbag? There was a brief silence between them until Yami burst out laughing. You kill me, he choked out. Oh, that's funny. Have you forgotten how many times I've left you bleeding on the ground? I'm not holding back this time, Shiro replied harshly. I'm not a child you can kick around just because you feel like it anymore. Yes, you are, Yami said dismissively. Always have, always will be. And once the others arrive, oh boy, the things we're going to do to you will make yesterday look like. They're dead, Shiro interrupted, much to Yami's confusion. I killed them all not long before coming here, so they won't be helping you. What? Yami exclaimed. That couldn't be right. There was simply no way a boy like Shiro could kill his best men all by himself. Honestly, I thought it'd be much harder, Shiro admitted. Although, they had no idea I could turn invisible, so that probably helped. Glad Itsuki told me to keep that one hidden. I haven't killed Kawatari yet, but I will after I'm done with you. Yami scoffed. He didn't know whether or not Shiro was telling the truth, but that last part reeked of arrogance. You won't even, Yami started. He was cut off by Shiro unleashing a whip of light that wrapped tightly around his body. Using all his strength, Shiro threw Yami into the opposite wall. He then yanked his dazed opponent towards him. Crafting a sword of light, Shiro thrust it forward to pierce the monster's heart. Unfortunately, Yami was not that easy to kill. It did little to deter Shiro, who was on his feet again. Holding out both his hands, Shiro fired off a concentrated beam of light. Yami did the same with his darkness. Light and darkness collided mid-air, with both men appearing to be evenly matched. This can't be right. He's matching me. Yami thought worriedly. How is this possible? He doesn't get to win, Shiro decided. I won't let him. Shiro's anger began to increase his power. And very slowly, light began to overpower the darkness, causing Yami's eyes to whiten in horror. Boom. Shiro's move finally connected with Yami, sent him flying several meters back. How? Yami said. How are you so strong? Intense training, fighting for my life, and meditation, Shiro said with a firm resolve. Yami stared at him. And stared. And stared. What? He asked, completely dumbfounded. It's good for sharpening the mind, Shiro defended. Yami continued to stare at him. I probably could have phased it all better. Maybe get rid of the meditation part, Shiro realized. You know it doesn't matter. Because I'm still going to kill you. Why though? Yami cried, sounding genuinely upset. After everything I've done for you, giving you a place to live, a job, the chance to grow stronger, why would you do this to me? Shiro stared at him, unable to speak, for what felt like an eternity. His eyes were wide, and his mouth held open as his face twisted into something that could only be described as completely and utterly disturbing. That's how delusional was Yami. Clearly enough to believe his own words, but not enough for Shiro to believe him. Are you fucking kidding me? Shiro stammered. Izuku killed my mother, you kidnapped me and molested me before turning me into a prostitute, you and your demented followers beat the shit out of me every chance you got, forced me to fight for my life in death matches, gang raped me for the stupidest fucking excuse, made me walk home naked and bleeding. And then you tried to force to work the next day right after my best friend had been murdered, something you didn't even properly investigate. Shiro took a deep breath and glared harshly at the monster who ruined his life. I will say this once. I hate you and everyone like you. The only thing you have ever done for me is give me pain, and lots of it. The same with everyone else who's ever crossed your path. And now, I'm going to return the favor in full force. Shiro waited a few seconds before striking again. He wanted to give Yami the chance to digest his words and let the message sink in. Before he could act, however, Shiro was grabbed from behind by shadows that held him down. Return the favor full force, huh? Yami mused. I like that idea. Unfortunately, I'll be the one performing it, you little shit. Shiro struggled against the confines of darkness to no avail. Look familiar, Shiro. It should. Our first time together was like this, along with many others. Shiro struggled much harder than he did before, violently trying to unleash his quirk. Don't bother. You're trapped, with no one coming to save you. You know it's funny really. Before I took you, there was someone who tried to claim custody of you. Some cat lady. Shiro's eyes whitened. It had been years since he had thought about her, but he had never forgotten. Nico. I refused, of course. But she wouldn't take no for an answer. So, being me, I forced my quirk down her throat and killed her slowly from within. I was lucky she didn't explode because I had just gotten a new outfit, and let me tell you, removing blood from clothes is a colossal pain in the ass, Yami finished. Shiro felt a myriad of things at that moment. Sorrow and grief for Nico, a friend who had been there for him at birth and tried to adopt him, and an even stronger hatred for the man who murdered her. In that moment, his desire to kill Yami amplified. I think we've been talking long enough, don't you? Yami sneered as his quirk entered Shiro's mouth. Goodbye, Shiro. Darkness consumed Shiro entirely. Yami's shadows forced their way down his throat, damaging his insides. The process was slow, but also excruciatingly painful, as intended. Shiro couldn't move. He couldn't cry nor scream. The only thing he could do was lie in wait. So, this is how it ends, ravaged inside out by that monster, Shiro thought ruefully. Oh, well. At least I fought back in the end. Better to die free than be ruined day in day out. Suddenly, images of the people Shiro had known came flooding back. Memories of his sweet mother looking after him and loving him. Memories of Nico playing with him as a child. Memories of Itsuki training him, nurturing him, meditating with him, basically being a father to him. They all came flooding back. He knew what they would want and what they would say. Which was why he couldn't let their sacrifices be in vain. No, I won't die. Not because he wants me to. Or anyone else. Never. Never again. I want to live. For their sake. But also, my own. And for anyone who tries to say otherwise, to hell with them. From this onward, this is my life. I swear it. Pushing his very soul to the limit, Shiro willed every single ounce of power he had inside. Yami was waiting patiently for his prey to succumb. Not much longer now, he murmured gleefully. Just then, he noticed a glimmer of light from his shadow prison. The light was dim, but it was there. And then, it exploded. Present. All Might's ultimate move collided directly with Shiro, who remained smiling throughout the entire event. The result was a powerful explosion where strong winds and rays of light gusted all over the area. When the dust settled, Shiro was nowhere to be found. What? All Might thought, confused. Where? Oh, All Might, a distorted voice of Shiro called. Look up. Doing that, All Might looked and saw multiple bright lights in the sky. However, after giving them a closer inspection, he saw they were 44 years ago. Shiro's. The lights were carbon copies of Shiro levitating in the air. There was at least 20 of them that were just there, observing the scene with surprise. The real Shiro, gasping for air, shakily stood up. He stared at his clones in shock, who stared it back. What the fuck? Yami exclaimed, equally shocked. What is this? Hearing his voice, the clones turned to him with angry expressions, causing Yami to flinch. Are you all real? Shiro asked without thinking. Depends on what your definition of real is, one answered. Another fired a light beam into the wall, damaging it. We're physical and we can touch. We feel what you feel. And want what you want. However, given that you are the source, the original, we will do what you ask. Because if you die, so do we. So, what would you like us to do? While Shiro was, understandably, baffled by the information he had received, not to mention confused by what he had done, he didn't need to think hard about their question. Can you hold him down? He asked, pointing at Yami. I want to do to him what he tried to do with me, us. The clones nodded and turned their attention to Yami, who was backing away nervously. Before he could react, the clones simultaneously released light whips that ensnared Yami. Before long, they had him down in the position he had trapped Shiro in so many times. And just like Shiro, he started squirming to escape. Seeing that his tormentor was at his mercy, Shiro strode forward with a dark smile on his face. A small light blade came up from his fingertips. Wait, Shiro, please, Yami begged as sweat built upon his face. Please don't. You're not like me. You're better than this. Itsuki and your mother wouldn't want you to. The excuses poured out of him like a waterfall. However, they only served to make Shiro angrier as he quickened his pace. Pulling his arm back, he thrust it forward into Yami's eye and pushed slowly. His light was hotter than normal, thereby intensifying the pain. Ah! Yami's scream resonated throughout Aris. It was music to Shiro's ears. 11 years he had put up with this man and his horrors. Now was the day of recompense. He moved his right hand over Yami's mouth. Shiro, please. I'm sorry. I won't do it again. I'm sorry. Please just don't. Don't kill me. I don't want to die. Please spare me, I'll do anything. Anything. Yami pleaded with bloody tears. His pleas fell on deaf ears. How about you go hell? Shiro said cruelly. Because that's exactly where I'm sending you. Goodbye, Yami. Shiro released light down Yami's throat and throughout his entire body. Yami couldn't even scream as Shiro's attack moved slowly as it tore its way through his body. The heat applied made the move all the more devastating as it slowly tortured the evil leader of Aris until finally, his life came to a merciful end. As the clones disappeared, Shiro stared down at the ruined corpse in front of him and exhaled. He had done it. Present. The 35 clones, or holograms as they were commonly known, simultaneously fired multiple beams of light at All Might, who was unable to deflect them all. One strike led to another, and then another until All Might was overwhelmed with attacks from multiple sides. To one side, the real Shiro just stood and watched with a smile. Following his battle with Yami when his quirk underwent an awakening, it took him several years to perfect this trick. After speaking with a scientist who specialized in areas pertaining to light, Shiro discovered what he had done was create 3D holograms of himself. By focusing light beams, he could create physical copies of himself and other things. These beings could use his quirk and had a will of their own, however, they weren't as powerful as he was, but could still pack a wallop. It took him years to master this skill, and even now it was his most difficult. Light Stage helped by making the holograms stronger and more durable. All Might struggled to fight back. The attacks were literally coming from everywhere. Without warning, 15 of the holograms ensnared him with light whips and held him in place, while the others formed a circle. I think it's time we wrap things up, don't you, Toshinori? Shiro addressed. I know heroes always have something to protect, but that doesn't just apply to you. A mother protecting her child. A teacher defending their student. A villain looking after their group. Everyone always has something they need to protect. I was born in hell, and I raised this group and city up from nothing. I need to protect Hades because otherwise, everything I did was all for naught. He then joined hands with his holograms in the circle. But enough about me. Time for the grand finale. The Shiros started to glow brighter and brighter, while All Might remained restrained. Then, without warning, a massive laser fired into the sky. Ultimate move. Tower of Light. All Might couldn't move. He couldn't scream. He couldn't even think. The only thing he could do was feel pain. Immense pain. Warning 3. This scene is very violent. 44 years ago. Kawatari walked through Aris to Yami's office. He hadn't been present yesterday when they launched a manhunt for Hikari. Why that boy couldn't just behave himself he didn't know. Still, he looked forward to the punishment and how he would take part. Because he brought Aris a lot of income through his connections, he was given a bit more leeway than the other members. Most of them disliked him for this, but he could care less, as did Yami. As long as he got to have a good time while providing what he could, it was a win-win situation for them. The man hadn't even batted an eyelash when he killed Itsuki, the man who had stood between him and Hikari. That man had irritated him for so long that when he tried to argue against the punishment, Kawatari had had enough and killed him with his quirk and a knife. It had been so easy. As he walked through Aris, he noticed how quiet it was. No guards, no employees, slaves, no customers. It was like a ghost town. Feeling uneasy, he started running towards Yami's office. When he arrived, he saw the wreckage and the bloodstains causing him to panic. The area wasn't safe, meaning he needed to get out. The moment he turned, something sharp stabbed him in the crotch. A bright knife that dug in deep before disappearing. Ah! Kawatari screamed as he fell to the ground clutching his damaged jewels. Ah! Fuck. You won't be doing much of that anymore, I'm afraid, a familiar voice sneered. Hope you don't mind me going for the first. You were also so proud of him, weren't you? Shiro, coated in a blanket of light, walked slowly towards his most desired prey. Castration wasn't something he liked, but for Kawatari, he would make an exception. Hikari, Kawatari wailed. Calling Shiro by his mother's name earned him another knife, this time in his right knee. Kawatari screamed in agony as he tried to scramble away. It's Shiro, you son of a bitch, the teen reprimanded harshly. Hikari is dead. You killed her. And now I'm going to kill you. Kawatari glared hatefully at the boy. That was your fault, and hers. If she had just, he tried to defend. Shiro cut him off by blasting his other knee with light. The attack was so strong it cut Kawatari's leg off, causing him to scream even more. It was your fault. Shiro stated icily. You barged into out home on her day when she wasn't supposed to be doing anything, even though she promised you the following day, and used your quirk on us, beat me, attempted to force yourself on her, and when she still refused you killed her and tried to blame me. It doesn't matter if it was a service, no means no. And since you're too pathetic to ever take responsibility for your own actions, I'll do it myself. Kawatari tried to defend himself, but Shiro pierced both his hands, causing him to scream again. As the boy neared, Kawatari attempted to use his quirk, but much to his surprise, it wasn't working. Don't bother, Shiro said coldly. I figured out how your quirk works. It's through air particles, right? Kawatari shuddered in terror. Well, this little coat of mine acts as a barrier to block it out. Yami will kill you for hurting me, Kawatari stuttered. I'm valuable so. Yami is dead. I killed him and every other bastard who shares his tastes, Kawatari's eyes widened. And now it's your turn. Shiro sliced off Kawatari's hands and other leg, rendering him immobile. He then started slowly cutting other parts of him off, trying to prolong his pain as much as possible. Meanwhile, Kawatari could nothing but scream. Realizing he would be dead soon, he stupidly tried reasoning with Shiro. Wait. Shiro, please. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I killed your mom. It was an accident. I never meant for it to happen. He desperately pleaded. Please don't kill me. Shiro momentarily halted his mutilation. At long last he admits it, Shiro said coolly. A bit late I'm afraid. You see Kawatari, you didn't just murder her. For years, you raped me again and again, and yes it was rape because I did not want to do any of it, and to top it all off you murdered Itsuki. Kawatari's eyes widened. That's right I know. One of the guards told me. Shiro then leaned in close so that their faces were almost touching. So, let me be clear. It doesn't matter how much you apologize. Nothing will ever make up for what you did, ever. I'm sending you to hell where you belong and that's final. It was at this point Kawatari began to cry. I just wanted to relieve some stress in my life that's all, he sobbed. Well, I hope it was worth it. Goodbye Kawatari, Shiro said softly as he extended his hands. Light shone out, and Kawatari screamed. The screams lasted for several minutes, and then, it was over. Later, Shiro walked among the tunnels slowly. The guard had given him directions, so he knew where he was going. But he had a bag with some money, clothes, food, and Itsuki's letter. They were all he needed. Shiro had a feeling he would be back underground at some point, but for the moment he wanted to experience the world, or at the very least glimpse it. There was a light at the end of the tunnel, and Shiro rushed towards it. On the other side was outside. An ocean. A big city with lights. Fresh air he had never breathed. All the things his mother, Nico, and Itsuki mentioned, but he had never seen. He didn't know how long he was standing there, but he didn't care. Everyone, I did it. Present. Helicopters swarmed the summit as the light finally cleared. What they saw was a sight that terrified them for a long time. Shiro stood above All Might, who was lying scorched unconscious on the ground, with his left fist raised in the air. It was a horrific mockery of All Might's victory in Kamino. Looking up with a smile, the whole nation could Shiro's bloody face and injured body. He said nothing, but the message was clear. The raid had failed. Thanks for listening. I do hope you enjoyed. If you want the next part of this video, like, subscribe and comment down below, and turn on the bell notification. And also check out other videos that I have created and enjoy. See you in the next video. Peace.